Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about something that's been happening in Russia very quietly whilst the war in Ukraine has been going on, and now it's just becoming too big not to discuss. Because Russia has confiscated, seized or taken control of assets worth more than $50 billion. $50 billion, that is a huge amount of money. Now, we've talked about some of these cases before on the channel. Companies like BP, Danone, Carlsberg, Uniper and Fortum. But what we haven't really done is taken a step back and look at the bigger picture, because this isn't just a handful of companies that are being affected. What we're now seeing looks much more like a fundamental shift in how the Russian economy is structured. And to really understand what's going on, we need to go back to 1991. But before we do that, could I ask anybody that hasn't subscribed yet to please hit that subscriber button? Really helps me with the algorithm and also puts a smile on my face. Now, back in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia made a deliberate decision to move away from communism. Under the Soviet system, the state owned everything. Factories, oil fields, infrastructure, farms, all controlled centrally. There was no concept of private ownership in the way that we understand it today. But in the 1990s, Russia opened up. It embraced privatisation. State assets were sold off. Businesses were transferred into private hands. Many of those people became known as oligarchs. They became instant billionaires because they basically were given all of these state assets. A new class of wealthy businessmen emerged. Now, whatever you think about how that process was handled, it marked a clear shift towards capitalism, towards private ownership, towards a system where individuals, not the state, controlled economic assets. But if we fast forward to today, it's increasingly looking like that trend is going into reverse, because since the start of the war in Ukraine, Russia has been steadily moving back towards state control of key industries and assets. Now, this isn't being called communism, and it isn't identical to the Soviet system, but the direction of travel is very clear. Less private ownership, more state involvement, more political control over who owns what. And the scale of the shift is now enormous. According to research from a Russian law firm, the total value of assets that have been seized or transferred since the war began is estimated to be more than $50 billion. And importantly, this is happening through multiple channels. The first is what Russia calls temporary management. This mainly affects foreign companies. Businesses were taken under state control, often on the basis that their home countries were unfriendly. So BP, Danone, Carlsberg, all those companies that we've talked about before. Now, in theory, this was supposed to be temporary, but in practice, it's often resulted in those companies losing their assets entirely. If we take the example of Carlsberg, its Russian business was seized and later sold at a steep discount, basically given away for nothing. Danone, same story. Fortum and Uniper, billions of euros of assets taken under state control. They were power stations, basically. And of course, BP walked away from its long-standing position in Russia, into which it has invested billions of dollars. Now, here's the key point. This is no longer just about foreign companies who are from unfriendly nations, because the second wave is Russian-owned businesses. And this is where things start to look very different, because these are not just Western corporations. These are domestic companies owned by Russian businessmen, and yet they are also being taken under state control. In 2025, Russia's prosecutor general said the state had recovered assets worth trillions of rubles, and the justifications vary from case to case. Corruption, illegal privatisation, national security, foreign connections, or strategic importance. But when you take a step back, you start to see a pattern, because many of these cases involve assets that were privatised in the 1990s, assets that were originally owned by the state, then transferred into private hands, and are now, decades later, being brought back under state control. Examples include major infrastructure like airports, agricultural businesses linked to food supply, logistics companies, energy services, even gold producers like UGC, where a multi-billion-dollar stake is now being auctioned after being seized. And that raises a really important question. Is this about enforcing the law, or is this about reversing the privatisation of the 1990s? Now, to be fair, Russia has its own explanation. The Kremlin argues that this is a response to Western sanctions, that Russian assets have been frozen overseas, that this is economic retaliation. They also say it's about protecting strategic industries during a time of war, and in some cases correcting past wrongdoings. But critics see this very differently, because when the legal justification changes from case to case, and when ownership can be challenged decades after the fact, it creates uncertainty, and that uncertainty has consequences, because what we are now seeing is a system where ownership is no longer absolute, it is conditional. Conditional on politics, conditional on alignment, conditional on states' current priorities. And that brings us back to the bigger picture. Because when Russia moved away from communism in 1991, it made a clear statement that the future would be based on private ownership and market economics. But what we're seeing today suggests a shift back in the other direction. Not a full return to Soviet-style communism, but certainly a move towards greater state control and influence over the economy. And that matters because economies don't just run on resources, they run on confidence. Confidence that if you invest, if you build something, if you create value, you'll be allowed to keep it. And once that confidence starts to disappear, it can have long-term consequences that go far beyond the immediate headlines. So the bottom line is this: what started as a series of isolated cases has now become something much bigger. A $50 billion transfer of assets across foreign and domestic companies, and potentially a structural shift in how the Russian economy operates. So I'll keep you posted on any further news and developments on this story, but hopefully you found today's video useful, informative, and most importantly, thought-provoking, trying to get you thinking in different ways. If you've liked what I've said, or maybe you didn't like it but you thought it was interesting, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Don't forget, I'm currently running my competition where you can win my property or a cash alternative prize. Scan the QR code on the screen now, or click the link in the description below if you'd like to get involved in that. It's another fun way of funding the channel. Thank you so much to everyone that supported me in other ways. If you bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron or a member, thank you so much, really do appreciate it. I know I've said it a lot, but it genuinely means a lot to me, helps to keep me making more videos.